Hello and welcome to another episode of Market Watch. Today I have with me Mr. Lakshman Silva, who is the CEO of DFCC Bank. Good day, Mr. Silva. Thank you so much for joining us. With uh, having the banks being very interesting in the market, and I think also been a lot of interest on the banking counters with the investors. So I think it's very timely that we speak to the banks and also with the results for previous quarters results, the half a year results. We just want to get a view of how you see the market, Mr. Silva, in terms of the banking industry. Mr. Silva, if I kick off, uh, can you give me a little roundup on the bank's performance in the previous quarter or the last half year performance, Mr. Silva?
Yeah, thank you, Ranu, for inviting me to discuss with you today. In fact, the DFCC completed the first 6 months of this financial year with resounding results. Our although our asset growth have been not that significant, but we have been able to grow the profitability. At the group level, the PBT had grown by about 60% plus, and the PAT level that we have grown by about 70% compared to the 2016 similar period of time. We are coming from a background of two institutions working parallelly for a long period of time, DFCC Bank PLC and DFCC Vardhana Bank, and we amalgamated the two banks in October 2015. So 2016 had been the first year of operation as an amalgamated entity, and 2017, actually speaking, the first quarter is the year at which that we are working as a complete combined operation. So I think we are happy with the first year of first 6 months of our results. There are significant challenges that we have to face actually during this period of time. The interest margins are coming under severe pressure. We didn't see a significant asset growth. In fact, as a DFCC had taken a policy decision that we will not aggressively grow assets. We are very concerned about our market fundamentals, key performance indicators specified by the central bank and the other authorities. So we are managing that. And so as a result, anyway, the asset growth was not good. But the significant factor for the DFCC Bank is that we positively grew our liability based actually. That is something that we had been looking for adjusting in our balance sheet because in the early days of DFCC asset book had been mainly funded through credit lines, and as a result, their liability book was very small. So as a combined entity also, that we have a challenge to grow the liability book. So I think during the first 6 months of this year, we had concentrated more on the liability side. So we have been successful in that, and we are expecting good results to come in the third quarter as well.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Silva, you mentioned about not aggressively growing the lending book, but could you give me a little indication of what expectation you'll have in terms of the loan book growth specifically, and what prime sectors would you be concentrating, or would you be wholly still looking at in terms of sector wise?
As I mentioned to you, it's not that we are very not aggressive enough,
Okay.
but in the market fundamentals also didn't work in our favor in this during the banking. If you look at the banking community, all the banks have not grown that much in the asset advances book. But if you really look at we are looking at about 10 to 12% asset growth during the year. That is the far below the normal industry average maybe. But during this period of time, that I think in the next 6 months, we should be able to achieve the desired results, and we are building up our capacity, and we see a greater demand for credit during the next, the last 3 months, and I think same thing will apply in the next 3 months as well. With regard to the specific sectors, that we actually as a DFCC Bank have been a pioneer in the most of the sector development. Over the years, we are known to be the pioneers in the hydro sector. We had done many projects in the wind sector, solar power sector. So therefore, I think we are progressing in that sector further. There are projects in our pipeline, and we are implementing some of the projects in that particular area. In addition to that, there is a economic requirement in Sri Lanka for waste management, and there's a bigger demand in the waste management area, and the government had taken a few initiatives, and also it is nice to see the private sector joining hand with government in this hour of need. And there are a few projects in and around Colombo coming up for waste energy management, and DFCC also together with other banks are taking part in these particular projects. In addition to that, we are also into the hospitality sector. Government had stipulated, central bank had stipulated certain thresholds where the certain sectors had to be activated by the government, by the banking community, and we have identified the hospitality sector as one of the key areas, and so we are also targeting in that, and we are developing certain projects in that area. Need not be in Colombo and suburbs, but it is outstation mostly, and also the hospital sector where the healthcare is a key area. Private healthcare sector also is some of the segments that we have been looking at, and there are developments that we are doing in and around Colombo plus outstation. So these are the primary sector. But if you really know DFCC is catering to a wide segment of the industry segment. We are into the agriculture sector, into the tea industry, and many more other sectors. So I think across the bank, if you look at, we are covering almost all the sectors which have been identified by the government as priority sectors.
Right. Lovely, Mr. Silva. I mean, also especially with the power and energy, I think the requirement is going to increase. So I think focusing on that sector will be very beneficial as well. And also the healthcare also is one of the prime sectors. So what your vision for the bank also is to go in line with in terms of the growth expectations of the policymakers, so that you can capitalize on those projects most probably. And when you move on to Mr. Silva, in terms of the internal credit policies and provisioning and NPLs management, what are the measures that you have taken within the bank for these to be managed? How would you be different? I know each bank would have their specific strategy that works for them. I know some certain banks are more in terms of a single at a head level they are managing it, or some people want to diversify it. But what would your strategy be in this?
Actually, we have 139 plus units around the country.
Yeah.
So we have in the bank had identified the branch banking separately from the corporate units, and majority of the credit evaluations for the average size of facilities are being processed through the branch network. That we see as a positive way of doing the business, because there is an opportunity for the clients to get involved with our bank very closely. Our officers are also having the opportunity to monitor the projects very closely. But when it comes to the larger value projects, that we have been taking those evaluations at the central level, and currently majority of these large value projects are managed centrally. So there is a technical expertise coming from our head office people. There are some dedicated units which are looking at these particular sectors. They do the sector studies, and depending on the outcomes of that, only that we take the call to fund those projects. With regard to the credit evaluations, we have the credit scoring models that have been implemented. Bank had gone through that for the last 2 years. We had back tested all those, and positive results have been seen through that.
Right.
So we keep improving those credit scoring models going forward, and I believe that can be a very great advantage for bank credit management in going forward. With regard to your question with regard to the NP, and we had seen in the last 6 months to 1 year, there have been natural calamities around the country which we never expected. As a result, some of the projects have got affected. So proactively the bank had taken measures to assist these clients and see whether additional moratorium should be granted to these clients. That had been done. Additional financial assistance, there may be requirements, then we have done that as well. Practically I don't see there is a major impact through those disasters that we faced, except for a few projects. Others have come back to their normal operations with the assistance of the bank and from the other agencies that they have got the financial assistance. In addition to that, we have been very proactive, and we have a central monitoring unit with regard to the credit recoveries, which we implemented about a year and a half ago. traditionally we have a large number of long-term lending projects which are being funded by the DFCC Bank. So naturally, compared to our banks, other competitors, we have a larger portion on project financing. So there will be need for restructuring, rehabilitation of such projects. So proactive measures has to be taken as a responsible bank. Right. So therefore, we have set up a separate dedicated unit, and we monitor all those projects very separately, individually, and a lot of attention is going to that. If we find there is a sector-wise kind of an effect through other reasons, corrective actions are taken by the bank very early stages. So early warning signals have been looked at. We go through the industry studies very carefully. Research studies provided by other organizations have been used by us, and in addition to that, we have a dedicated unit who looks at specialized research into the specialist sectors. Through that, we get certain information. Through that also we manage the process. So as you correctly mentioned, for the banking community, recoveries, collections are a challenge going forward. We see a slight increase into the NPL portfolio, but I don't think nothing to get alarmed about it. All things will work very well, and we are trying to recover all those facilities.
Right. Ms. Vinay, also you talked about adjusting your liability side as well, but how about CASA building? What are your plans on building CASA? I know most of the bank, this is one of the major income, I mean, in terms of funding sources. So what are your strategies going forward for CASA?
You are absolutely spot on, because the DFCC had when you look at an organization which as a development bank for 60 plus years had never had the need for having CASA. They were mainly depending on the credit lines that had been generated for funding purposes. But Vardhana for 12 years have been developing their CASA as a commercial bank. But with the amalgamation, when you see the consolidated situation, we are actually below the CASA standards which are managed by the industry. But with all those, we were able to complete a satisfactory level of CASA percentage by 2016 December. And during the early stages of these 6 months, we had taken a lot of steps improving the CASA. But if you look at really the industry sector, the CASA percentages across the banking sector had gone down. That has a valid reason for it, because we had seen the differential in interest in FDs and savings getting narrowed. So as a result, the people had started moving actually into FDs than to the savings. So I think going forward that we will have a big challenge in getting this, and also the bigger corporates have been very conscious about their fund management, and nothing is left in their current account. So it's a challenge for the banks to get these corporates also to move into cash operations, and so we have identified certain strategies that are required as a bank to implement on a priority basis to get the CASA up and going. And I'm hopeful that the initiatives that we have implemented during the last 6 months will bring in good results in the years to come. But it's a challenge to face.
Mr. Silva, with the Basel III requirements from July 2017 onwards, capital adequacy has been a major challenge for most of the bank going forward. I know that you all have a very good tier 1, tier 2, but what do you see in terms of, do you see that because you have more leeway in terms of lending more aggressively if necessary, do you see that would be a strategy that you take into consideration Basel III implementing?
Actually, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, that the first 6 months our asset growth, we were very cautious about our asset, because more than numbers in growing, we were concentrating on quality asset growth. One of the reasons is, as you correctly mentioned, with the Basel III coming up, the banks are challenged to maintain capital ratios. Capital is hard to come by, and we know the requirements. So therefore, we are actually looking at the Basel III requirements very closely. As you mentioned, we are at the moment are okay. Our asset growth is not hindered through any kind of capital requirements. Even for the next year, I believe that we should be okay. But there are plans put in our work planning as to how the capital augmentation should take place if necessary going forward. But if we had to go for asset advanced growth, definitely the capital is going to be a challenging thing.
Mr. Also, if you look at the banking sector, I know I'm talking about the asset qualities now. There's been aggressive lending to the commercial and residential apartment sectors. And there's been a hot topic in the market. Everybody's thinking there's a bubble. There isn't a bubble. I think the industry players are convinced it isn't. There are a lot of evidence for it that isn't, as well as, but the market is perceiving it as there might be a bubble, the overpricing, etc. In terms of the banks, are they still growing towards, or do you see in terms of the holistic banking sector, do you think there will be more opportunity, or do you think the banks will take a more stringent approach towards lending to the sector? What is your view on that?
There have been some comments from the authorities with regard to the development of properties in Sri Lanka, especially with regard to the Colombo and suburbs, I believe. We had not seen that kind of progression in outstations outside the Colombo Western Province.
Yeah.
But I'm not privy to what the other banks have done. But of course, what we can tell is with regard to the DFCC, we have been very selective in going into the development of buildings, apartment complexes, and Sri Lanka. There have been instances where we have been a participant to such projects purely on the merit of the project, the project promoter. Then also after looking at the ability to the bank to leverage through the housing loan sector.
Right.
If there are positives, then we had taken part in such projects. But primarily when selecting the development such projects of that nature, we make sure the sufficient equity is brought in by the project promoter, and in addition to that, the pre-sales are sufficiently met before the loans are disbursed. So accordingly, the projects are managed on that basis, and we go for mainly for the housing facility. I see there are buildings coming up in and around Colombo, but when we speak to the developers, they say that the whole developments have been booked by the clients, prospective clients. But I think banks have taken a step back at the moment. Central Bank is making a study on this particular segment.
Yes.
And we are waiting for the directions to be given by the Central Bank. So, but we as a industry are very closely monitoring these sectors and funding according to the guidelines.
Thank you so much, Mr. Silva, for joining us today. That will be the roundup. And thank you everybody for joining us, and have a very good day. Bye-bye.